Well, I'm glad that you could join us again for another True Crime Files of Los Angeles Inside Story. We've been talking about the criminal justice system, in particular sentencing. How does that fit in? There's a lot of people who complain about the sentencing that goes on in the criminal justice system, and we want to examine that. We've talked about in some of the prior podcasts, we talked about retribution, we talked about deterrence, rehabilitation, incapacitation, meaning incarceration, and we talked about the death penalty as part of that. So we want to continue with that, and we want to talk further about the death penalty or the lack of the death penalty. And some of the arguments are that people have, should the killer live when the victim never had a choice? Well, okay, and then there's some people who don't like the fact that people in prison are going to have the right to vote. Well, the victims certainly do not have the right to vote. I like to use this quote from President Obama. He said, "I have said repeatedly that I think that the death penalty should be applied in very narrow circumstances for the most egregious of crimes." Well, you know, there's some merit in what he is saying. Even though the death penalty is not as popular as it once was. Many years ago, in the 70s and 80s, 80% of the population in California was in favor of it. Today, it most likely is a little, maybe 51 to 53%. So it's waning. But why is that? Well, the public, as well as the media, have been very critical of the death penalty for justifiable reasons, granted. And they have this philosophy: why do we kill people who kill people to show killing people is wrong? And many people have accepted it. They said, well, let's do away with the death penalty because there's too many problems with it. And then you have people like this on street corners. Here's a lady saying, execution is not the solution. And, you know, that may be true. And when you do away with the death penalty, why don't you come up with a solution, some way of handling those types of individuals? So that's what I want to do in our podcast today. I'm going to talk about 3 defendants who received the death penalty: William Bonin, Tootie Williams, and Sandi Nieves. So let's get started with our first one, William Bonin. Many of you know him to be the Freeway Killer, and there were a number of Freeway Killers in Los Angeles, but back in 1979 he was most likely the most prolific, and he would kill young men, and their bodies were found in Los Angeles County, Orange County, Ventura County, San Bernardino County, Kern County, all over. So we want to talk about him. And what would he do? He would pick up young men from the ages of maybe 15, well, that was the average, but some of them were as young as 12 and up to 19. And their bodies, they were always nude, and they had been sodomized. And as to how they were killed, generally they were strangled. And it could be manual strangulation, but most of the time it was some ligature that was used. And they would be bound, their feet would be bound, and their hands likewise would be bound, sometimes with handcuffs. So that's how their bodies were found. One of them in particular was stabbed 71 times and then strangled after that. Many of the people, the victims who were killed, their bodies were not found. The bodies had decomposed. And we were never able to prove exactly who they were, even though the accomplice were saying, well, yeah, that's where Bonin killed somebody and dumped the body, but we were not able to determine the identity of the individual. The other way of killing, he would sometimes use an ice pick and take the ice pick and either plunge it up the nose, the nostrils of the victims, or sometimes through their ear. You know, it would sometimes hit the cervical cord and kill the individual immediately. So that was one of the ice picks that he used. Now, he would drive around in this van. It was a Ford van. It was kind of light green in color, and looking for hitchhikers, generally hitchhikers. Once he got him inside the back of the van, there was carpeting, shag carpeting, and there was a curtain that he would pull across so that nobody from the outside could look in and see what was going on as far as the attack on these victims. So that was the way they would pick up the victims. Now, I want to start with this one victim, Marcus Grabs. He was from West Germany. He was over here wanting to see America, and he was hitchhiking all over the United States. He was in California, and he went to Newport. Spent a couple of days there, and then he got his backpack, and he started going up Pacific Coast Highway so he could get up to the San Francisco area. And as he's hitchhiking his way up, Bonin sees him and stops and picks him up. Gets him in the back of the van, takes him over to where he was living in Downey. They confine him. He's stabbed, he's strangled, and he's sodomized. And his body then is taken up to the Los Virgenes Canyon, the road there, and his body is dumped. He's nude, all his clothes has been taken, all of his identity has been taken, and his backpack is thrown on top of him. So that is our first victim, and it was maybe a couple of weeks later, in the same general area, another body is found of Donald Hayden, and some construction workers just off of the Ventura Freeway. They had a dumpster there, and they looked into the dumpster and they found a naked body of a young male. And again, homicide detectives were called out there, almost identical. He had been sodomized and he had been strangled. So the next one was David Murillo. He was 17 years old. He lived in La Mirada, in kind of the east side of Los Angeles. And he was riding his bicycle to get to the movie theater. And he was kind of in a hurry, but Bonin pulls up next to him and says, "Hey, you want to have some fun?" And he said, "Well, I don't know." And come on with me. And he did get in the van. And they took him up. They strangled him, sexually assaulted him. And his body was dumped up in Ventura County, in the city of Ventura. And far away, you know, almost 85 miles away, kind of strange as to why he was dumped up there. Now, nothing happened for several months until February of 1980, when a Charles Miranda, he was kind of in the West Hollywood area, and Bonin pulls up, talks to him, gets him to get in, and then takes him to kind of an isolated area in the Hollywood area, and has sexual relations with him, strangles him, and then he goes down into downtown Los Angeles, down this alleyway here, and he dumps the body right in that doorway of this manufacturing plant. Now, it wasn't too much longer. The following month, in March, he did the same thing to this Harry Turner. Takes him, picks him up. He was kind of a runaway in Lancaster. He was spending time in the West Hollywood area, and he didn't have any money. The only way he could do it was sexually going along with certain sex acts for money. And his body ends up in downtown Los Angeles, right there. You can see where that circle is. So that was very, very typical of a lot of the killings of young men in Los Angeles. Now, the next one is Darren Kendrick. This is in Orange County, and he was working a market down there as a box boy, and he was getting the carts pushing him back to the front of the market, and Bonin's there with one of his accomplices. They say, hey, why don't you come with us? We're going to have a party somewhere. And he gets talked into it. So he goes with them, and he's killed. And an ice pick was used through and found in his head when his body was recovered right here. It was kind of off the Artesia Freeway. So that kind of gives you an idea of the type of killings that were taking place by Bonin and his various accomplices. It was a while before the case could be solved, and it was solved in a kind of an interesting way. Jigsaw John, a detective from LAPD, got the word that maybe they should check out a person by the name of William Bonin. And they did. They did a surveillance. And they spotted him, and he picked up a young 17-year-old and was sexually molesting him, and he's arrested. So that was the beginning, and they get a search warrant for Bonin's house, and they go out. This is where he lived in the Downey area with his mother. And this was his room. No evidence was found there. But in the kitchen, when they opened this drawer, they found all of these ropes. And they're almost identical to the ligatures. Now, they ask around, who's Bonin's friend. They find out that this Vernon Butts is his friend, a close friend of his, and they contact him. And it was interesting. He started talking, and he was willing to say what he did, but he wasn't the instigator. He just said he did the driving, and he wanted to be a magician, and in his magician box was these ropes, same as the ligatures that were used to strangle. So when they checked out the van, they were able to come up with Bonin's van when they did a search warrant, and there you can see the rope. That is the type of rope that was used. And here, when they were doing the search, they looked at the van, and there's that curtain, the curtain that they would pull so nobody could see in. Now, the other thing was that the front of this is where they would sit, Bonin and Butts, or whoever the accomplice was, and they would entice the young men to get in the back of the van, close the door. Once the door was closed, there was no way out. There were no handles on the doors of the van. Well, anyway, I put this together for you so that you can see. Here's just a listing of some of the victims, the ones that we had in Los Angeles County that we prosecuted. Gives you an idea. And here is just some of the photographs of the victims in Los Angeles. Now, I wanted you to see who was William Bonin. And this timeline shows all the sexual crimes that he was involved in the early of the 70s. And he went to mental institutions, and he served time in prison. Got out, he got another case, sex case, and went back to prison, served more time, and eventually was released. I think it was in 1978. Then he gets back on the street. And here is just a list of the victims that we prosecuted and the victims that were prosecuted by the Orange County DA's office. So we get to this point, and we want to say, all right, what should we do as far as sentencing in the William Bonin case? He killed many people. We don't know all the people. The accomplice explained, and we were able to find a number of the bodies. They were all sexually assaulted. They were all vulnerable young men. They were all innocent. So what should he receive? Well, the death penalty, life without parole, or life with parole. Well, I've already told you, it was a death penalty case. The jury decided on the death penalty as the appropriate sentence. The judge gave it, and he received the death penalty, and he was eventually executed. So that is our first case that we want to talk about regarding the death penalty. So anyway, let me go on with a different type of case, And it's the Tootie Williams case. He was the co-founder of the Crips and very proud of his gang, the Crips. And he liked to go around robbing people, and in the process, he would shoot the victims. And he liked to shoot them with a shotgun, just blow them away, blow their heads off. Now, it's not that he was just a violent person, a gangster. He also was going to escape from one of the courthouses where he was being transferred. So we're going to be talking about all of that. Let me get started with the killing at a 7-Eleven. He goes in there with his buddies. He's got the shotgun. They go to the clerk and say, hey, where's their safe? And he's taking him to the back office where the safe was. So the clerk is cooperating with him, and he's walking right behind him. He takes his shotgun and shoots the clerk in the back, kills him, just blows him away. Now the clerk, Albert Owens, he had just gotten out of the Air Force and was working nights at 7-Eleven just to make some money. He didn't do anything, but he's shot right there in the 7-Eleven. Now, a few days later, Tootie Williams is over in the Los Angeles area, South Central, and there's a number of motels there. And he goes into this one motel, knocks on the door. They're closed, but he thinks they'll open, and they do. The Asian people who ran it, the daughter opens the door, and they force their way in. They get inside there, demand money, any money that is had in the motel. They know it's cash, and they take the shotgun, and they shoot this Asian husband, wife, and the one lady in there. And this is the shotgun. And this is how the case is connected. This is the shotgun that was used, and is traced back to Tootie Williams. And that was the identification. So the case was made against Tootie for a number of murders, and to also show what a violent, dangerous person he was this escape attempt from the Torrance courthouse. And here he is laying out, he has written this diagram to show his gang members where to go with their AKs, and a number of women who were persuaded to go to that courthouse. They were going to use dynamite to blow up the bus, and it was going to kill a number of the guards as well as a number of the inmates, just so Tootie could escape. So when it came to the clemency hearing before the governor, I was there, and what we were trying to persuade the governor is that these crimes were very, very dangerous, deadly, and he used these shotguns to kill these people in a very vicious way. We talked about the escape that could have killed a number of people at the courthouse, and all the appeals that went up. And now the defense, came back at the clemency hearing. Tootie's representative said, well, he's reformed. He's written this book called Life in Prison, and it's dedicated to his mentors. And these were his mentors. These were the most vile individuals, George, Jackson, all of these people. And he's, in his book, saying, these are the people I learned from, my mentors. And then they went on to talk about, he had been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And then we had to point out, anybody can be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. All you have to do is know a university professor in sociology, and they could nominate your name. And then they went on to say that Tootie, got an award from the president. Yeah, it was true. There was an award that he had gotten. It's easy to get. You give them, I think it's either $2 or $3, and you receive this award, presidential award. No, it didn't have any true meaning to it. So back to what we were saying about what is the appropriate sentence in Tootie Williams' case. Well, is it death? He killed a lot of people. These were during robbery killings. He didn't have to kill these people. They're innocent people. He always used his shotgun. And if you say, well, maybe life without the possibility of parole is sufficient. No, he was going to kill the guards as well as a number of the inmates on this bus going to the courthouse. Now, you're going to say, well, he was rehabilitated. Look at the books. As a matter of fact, they will say that he wrote children's books. Well, what we found out, yeah, there was somebody who wrote these children's books. They put the name Tootie Williams on the outside cover, but that was pretty much the extent of it. So it depends how you look at things. Now, I want to take one more, and that is the Revenge Mom. It's a case you have not heard about. It's Sandi Nieves, and what it involves is a slumber party for her children, 4 daughters who she has asphyxiated, who are killed. Why is she having her daughters killed? Because she's trying to get even with her ex-husbands, who are the fathers of her daughters. And the reason is support, child support, family support. Now, there's no question that divorces with children are very, very difficult. They're stressful, and people become very vindictive in these situations. And then the more children in. Now, remember, she has 5 children, 4 of them are daughters, from 2 ex-husbands and a boyfriend. And the question is, and I put this together, it was used in the trial. Here's Sandi Nieves, and these are the 2 exes, Nieves and Fulton, and these are the children that were born. David was a son born to Nieves, and she had a boyfriend as well, and she just had finished an abortion with the boyfriend. So Sandi was having very difficult times, and the straw that broke the camel's back, we could say, the breaking point was when she was served with this child support situation where her second ex-husband was going to annul the adoption of the 3 of her children, meaning that she was not going to get child support for them. And this was devastating. You know, how was she going to support 5 children without any money coming in, or very little money coming in? Her rent for renting this house was over $1,000 a month, and she didn't even have a bedroom. Her bedroom was that garage. She had converted the garage. There's her bed. So you can see things are very, very tough for her. The night before she killed the children, she wrote this note and she mailed it at the post office. And it says, "Now you don't have to support any of us. F you, you're scum." This was mailed to her second husband, the one that was trying to have the annulment of the adoption and loss of support. So you can see it was for revenge. And she got this gas container. This is the gas container. She took to the service station, got the gas. She took it and she poured it. You can see where she poured it in the house. And she lit it. In several places it caught fire. Other places it did not start because it didn't have enough oxygen. Here you can see she backed her van up against the garage door so the children could not escape. They could not climb out or open that garage door. And then in furtherance, she had all the children lie on the kitchen floor, supposedly for a slumber party with their sleeping bags and blankets. And so she takes the sliding glass door and she seals it so that none of the smoke can escape. So it's all taped up, and she takes the oven and she opens the oven up with the gas. So all of this is there to asphyxiate all of those children. Now, at some point, she changes her mind. She runs out through that sliding glass door. She jumps into the pool. Her feet are hot. It's so intense, hot, and smoked. And she sits there in that water. Then she goes back into the house. and she grabs her phone. She calls her ex-boyfriend up, explains what's going on, and eventually she calls the paramedics, the fire department, and they come out and find that her 4 daughters are dead on the kitchen floor. Well, I put this together here as a timeline to show all the events that happened in her life. We wanted the jury to see and understand the facts of this case. The plan that she went through to kill her children just to get even for her ex-husbands. And this was the defense that they raised, that maybe when she was a child, she may have hit her head. As a result of that, that may have caused her to act the way she did. This was her defense that was presented. Now, in turn, we wanted to show the intent that she demonstrated. She set up this slumber party. She backed up the van so they couldn't escape. She removed the batteries from the smoke detector. She sealed the house with duct tape. And she poured the gasoline throughout in several different places, not just one places. And she placed a towel in that oven that would catch fire. So there was tremendous amount of intent on her part to kill these 4 girls, her daughters. They didn't deserve anything. They were totally innocent. They weren't rebellious at all. They were wonderful, loving children. And I put this together to show the 4 daughters who they were. They were human beings who had tremendous potential of being wonderful people, if only they could have lived. So when it came to the penalty phase, we wanted the jury to see what was in aggravation and what was in mitigation. And I put this together on the scales. I just wanted the jurors to see of the 4 daughters who were killed and the son who was almost killed but was able to get out that door and was able to survive. Okay, now we get to what we've been talking about. What should be the sentence for Sandi Nieves? Well, we know 4 daughters were killed. It was done for revenge. Children were innocent. They had not done anything to deserve being harmed or damaged. Now, we look at the other side of it. There was some domestic violence, not domestic violence, but there was the divorce, the custody, the child support. Could she be rehabilitated? Yeah, you could make a pretty strong argument. Could she change her ways? Very likely. Is there a risk to society? Most likely not, because she has no other daughters to kill. And is she likely to go out there and kill somebody else? Highly unlikely. So what do we have? Well, you're going to have to decide. In this case, what was it? Was the death penalty appropriate? Well, what happened is, many years later, the California Supreme Court decided to throw out the death penalty, saying, well, yeah, the conviction is fine. And of course, by that time, the trial judge had passed away. And they wanted to blame the trial judge was that he wasn't overly fair to Sandi Nieves, and therefore the death penalty should be taken off the table. And if the DA's office wants to prosecute her for the death penalty, okay, they could do it. Well, the likelihood of that happening is remote to none. Anyway, so yeah, she is not facing the death penalty because of the court. Not because the jury and the judge didn't agree that it was appropriate. And some of you most likely would agree that the death penalty was appropriate in that case. But I would think a lot of you would agree, ooh, couldn't we find another way of doing it? Now we have talked about all 3. William Bonin, and I think we can easily summarize him as a sexual predator who was not going to change, didn't change, and continued to victimize young men. Then we have Tootie Williams. He was a brutal killer, and he would rob people and other gang members. He would use his shotgun just to blow people away. He knew how powerful you are when you have a reputation of being brutal. And then we have Sandi Nieves. How do we describe her? Well, I guess the best way would be a revenge killing. Wow. Look how she killed her loving daughters. So we get to the point, what should we do as far as penalty, punishment, sentence? The death penalty, life without parole, life with parole. Well, we know in Tootie Williams' case, he received the death penalty. So what are we going to do with these types of individuals? We know in California, the governor on his own decided to remove the death penalty room, dismantled it, so it couldn't be enforced. So that's what we're stuck with. Now, what I'm trying to say is, what are we going to do with these people if we're not going to impose the death penalty? And in the other podcast, I talk about William Bradford, Lawrence Bittaker, Douglas Clark. They're despicable human beings. And I think we have to develop a category for despicable human beings. And we would add in there William Bonin, Tootie Williams, and some of you most likely say Sandi Nieves belongs in that category. But where are we going to place these people? If you do away with death row, we have to come up with a place. Nobody likes to call it a prison. Why don't we call it a despicable confinement area, out in the desert area? And what would we do? We could place these people in an isolated area, give them the basics for taking care of themselves, but they would be treated humanely. But they would be required to work, and they would have limited communication with the outside world. Conjugal visits? No. Family visits? Most likely not. Why waste our time rehabilitating these people? Should they have entertainment, the internet? Should they have voting rights? Well, I'm not saying what it should be, but I think we need to get our politicians, our leaders, our courts, our judges and justices to come up, where do we want to place these people who are on death row, and no longer can we put them on death row. So I'm saying the criminal justice system, yes, has a lot of things that it needs to improve. Sentencing is one of the areas, but we need to approach the criminal justice reforms in a knowledgeable way, a practical way. And as I say here, there's so many people with the publicity, interest groups saying the criminal justice system is unfair. Well, let's see what we're talking about. What does the word unfair mean? When it comes to sentencing, we've got to consider the crime that is committed. We've got to consider the victims' families. If you want to learn more information about the demise of the death penalty and what we should be doing now, get my book, The Death of the Death Penalty, now closed. It's on Amazon, and it'll give you some insight as to my ideas of things that we should be considering, since we have a new landscape where we don't have the death penalty to impose in many of these despicable individual cases. So there's a lot of issues that need to be considered. So let's end this with the criminal justice system, yes, needs to be looked at. It needs to be reformed in some way, shape, or form. But I worked with it for almost 50 years. The criminal justice system can work. And even though there's improvement that needs to be made, it shouldn't be gutted. It should be retained and improved. And if it does, I think that we will find that our system does work and is something that we can be proud of. Well, hopefully you found this podcast interesting, maybe informative, maybe things that you don't want to think about and talk about. But please join us again for another True Crime Files of Los Angeles inside story when we discuss another topic of the criminal justice system. See you then.